So, what do you think are the most important tools or strategies to use in having a conversation with somebody about safe firearm storage?
I think a huge tool is being really validating and a lot of like reflections to make sure like people really understand that they're being heard and that it also makes sure that you're understanding what they're saying because sometimes people might use terminology or talk about things that you don't super know or know at all. And so being able to like make sure that you're actually understanding what they're saying and in those moments also being able to say if you are confused or don't know what that is, that humility is useful. Um, the big thing I found to be helpful is we did pros and cons of if things, if you were to do these different changes and versus if they stayed the same. And I found those to be really helpful because when people actually start writing out the benefits of doing changes, I think it really helped them to like solidify and see the benefit that this could bring them versus when you're just talking about it out in the open, it can be a lot harder for them to really grasp where it can be good. And it also can direct the conversation to what are the benefits? Because sometimes people get really stuck on, well, here are all the drawbacks if I did this thing with my firearm. So doing pros and cons really forces that conversation into a more positive light of what the change would bring. And I think that was really useful.
And I think another benefit of the pros and cons is that we did it in kind of a matrix too, so that it would be kind of the pros for storage and maybe, or for like secure storage, and then the cons for not storage. People would always tend to think that those boxes would be the exact same. And while they might have like just rephrased it differently, there were changes in how they kind of perceived things, which was really cool to see. And I think it was also helpful to ask them on a scale of like maybe 0 to 10 or like 0 to 5, how important and confident they are that they can implement these changes and that they want to implement these changes. Because if their confidence was maybe a 3 or like their willingness out of 10, then, we had to kind of consider, well, is this really something that's feasible for you? And another thing I really liked that I think is beneficial was that having them write out their plan and doing the pros and cons in their own words and in their own handwriting, because that way it's really giving them the autonomy to make that decision and it for it to be something that really reflects their beliefs, not ours.
Adding on to that, Sam, you reminded me of sometimes in the conversation, I would ask, like, so on a scale from 0 being not at all safe to 10 being the most safe you feel like you can be with your firearm, where do you feel like you fall? And with that, people define safety differently. So that can be like a little bit of a different conversation depending on how they perceive the word safety. But that can be a really useful tool because if they're like, oh, I'm like at a 6, and I'm like, oh, well, it seems like safety is really important to you from our conversation. So what could you do to be higher on that scale? And then that kind of lends itself really well to them recognizing on their own, oh, I'm only at a 6, but I know safety is important. I've been talking about how much I value safety. So what can I do to kind of move myself along in that direction that I want to go?
And one last thing that also reminded me of was that I think it was also helpful to really use open ended questions when we're having these conversations. And that if we, maybe they got stuck on like brainstorming different safety methods, that we would say, do you mind if I suggest a method that I've heard of? So we're not just coming in saying, well, let me tell you what you could do. We're saying like, are you okay with me telling you this? And I think they were really open and receptive to that, and appreciated that we're kind of respecting their boundary with that too.